Thank you again to Zudus Europa Gesellschaft for the invitation and for organizing this panel discussion. Before I continue, actually, I would like just to give a word to Manuel Saracen, yeah, director, please.
Thank you, Sonja. Actually, I don't want to give any big input. I think you already took over this situation quite perfectly. I just have the honor to introduce you a bit. I'm delighted that we are now starting with our panel discussion, which is a live event. So perhaps people who are joining us over the afternoon already recognize that some of the parts have been prepared, and this now is a live event. So as usual in this new online times, everything might get well or get wrong. But I'm really delighted that we will focus now on the topic of climate change, on the question of impact of climate change, how to challenge it, and what is the impact of the tries to adopt in the region. This is a major future topic for Southeast Europe. Southeast Europe is probably one of the regions in Europe which will be the most affected by climate change, but it's also the most important that fight against climate change and adoption of climate change measures cannot be done only nationally, which is quite obviously for everybody joining us here. And for this topic, it is perfect actually to have somebody from Agora Energiewende with us. Sonja Declaration is not only a delighted person with a lot of publishing work on the topic herself, she's also a responsible project manager at Agora Energiewende. And I can say as a Green MP, Agora Energiewende, this is like for others, DGAP or Robert Bosch Stiftung or Borussia Dortmund or Bayern Munich in this topic. So I just want to hand over the debate to you, and thank you, Sonja, so much for joining us. And yeah, I'm curious about learning more. No.
Thank you for the kind and great words. Of course, I will not hold too much because I want to leave as much time as possible for a discussion. I will just share my screen for that. So. Not to hold you further, the discussion today in the panel discussion will be, of course, regarding climate change, but in general, also I would say the EU Green Deal and the Balkan Green Agenda. And where is the region when it comes to fighting climate change, becoming climate neutral up to 2050, and in a way setting targets. I was already introduced. My name is Sonia Risteska, working in Agora Energiewende for the last 3 years and building our program and activities in Southeast Europe. What are the main takeaways? The main takeaways is that the EU Green Deal is, of course, once in a lifetime opportunity to change how our economies operate in the next 30 years. There will be major changes ahead of us, not only the power sector, so not only how we produce energy and electricity, but also how we use it. The other main takeaway of the presentation discussion today is this is possible. It's possible to decarbonize. But of course, the discussion is how to do it and in what timeline. And of course, I mean, what's the price tag of all of it? When it comes to the Western Balkans, of course, I mean, the major point of our discussions today is that we are still a long way from convergence with the EU in matters of clean energy transition, decarbonization, and fighting climate change. But not all is, of course, bad. The Western Balkans do have now the opportunity to finally embrace setting targets, setting higher climate targets, announcing coal phase out, and use the available fundings to accelerate the clean energy transition. The outline of the presentation and the panel discussion is that first I will focus on the EU Green Deal a bit, the impact, the new target, minus 55 of emissions 2030 compared to 1990 level will have on how our economies operate in the EU. Then I will focus on the reliance of the Western Balkan states still on quite polluting lignite power plants. And then I will a bit touch upon the impact on the long-awaited carbon border adjustment mechanism, which will have also, or is envisaged to have quite, I would say, big impact on the trade relations between the region and the EU. At the end, I will touch upon a bit of the Balkan Green Agenda, which is sort of, I would say, the small sister of the EU Green Deal. For specifically, of course, for the region of the Western Balkans, the need for investment in coal to clean transition, and what is the current pledged assistance from the side of the EU itself. After that, we have around a 15 minutes reflection. of the main panelists, who I will present later as well before we start the reflection. And then, of course, the most interesting part, around half an hour, we'll have a Q&A session with you, the audience. Just as an FYI, while the presentation is ongoing and while the reflection of the panelists is ongoing, I can only just encourage you to please also in this small tab Q&A or F&As, depends on yeah, which Zoom you use, to please start asking questions. Just yeah, state your name, to whom are you addressing the question, or if it's just general to the panel, and what is your question. After that, I will start choosing the questions, and once the Q&A session starts as well, you can also just I mean, turn on your mic and ask question directly if you think it's actually better, maybe even more exciting, because yeah, with Zoom we are sort of a bit losing this aspect of what it means to be in a room and actually just raise hands and stand up and ask questions. So that's for the formal part, but as I say, if you have any sort of questions, please use the Q&A function of Zoom, and please yeah, write them there. Okay, so the main part now, the EU Green Deal and the path towards decarbonized European Union. Why is this quite important? It's important because I would say more than a year ago, before the new commission convened, there was this proposal, grand proposal by the President Ursula von der Leyen, that the EU will strive to decarbonize itself by 2050. Now, of course, it's 30 years. It might seem a lot. It's not a lot. But what does that mean? It means that we need to start somewhere, and there needs to be a middle point where we actually check where we are and whether we are on good track or not. The EU already had targets. Of course, probably everybody knows that the EU already had targets for renewables, for energy efficiency, to lower the emissions minus 40% in 2030 compared to 1990 levels. However, it was soon realized that this is not enough. If we want to have a decarbonized union, and this means, is again, I will say, not just to do the coal phase out, but actually to decarbonize steel production, to decarbonize how we operate, the freight transport, aviation, heating, etc., etc. It will need actually much more. From measures, but also how much effort do we put in. Hence why this new sort of target was, I would say, discussed. There was a lot of discussion last year, even though there was a pandemic. And in the end, in December, during the German presidency, the new target of minus 55 GHG, or greenhouse gas emissions, in 2030 compared to 1990 level, was finally adopted. And this year, in 2021, there will be a huge legislation process which should make this happen. Why? Well, you can see on the presentation, basically, we need to cut as much emissions in the next 10 years as they were cut in the last 30 years. This is a big, huge endeavor. Of course, 30 years, we need to cram in 10 years. And this will take a lot of effort and, of course, a lot of money. According to all studies, the most efficient way to do this is to decarbonize first the power sector. Why? We already know how. We already have the technology. We already have renewables, which costs are already falling. And this is, I would say, the process which already began and can be quite finished easily in the next 10 years. Of course, the other sectors are also quite, I would say, energy intensive, like industry, like transport. But these sectors will take, I would say, now the discussion begins how to decarbonize this sector the best way, how to introduce new technologies like hydrogen, how to electrify the fleets. When it comes to transportation, what does it mean for the grids, etc., etc. So at least for the next 10 years, until we come to the middle point of 2030, the straightforward way would be to finally do the coal phase out. So in concrete terms, actually, this means that by 2030 on EU level, so EU 27, there will need to be, I would say, finalization of the coal phase out processes which have already been started, and in some of the countries they will be even finished in the next, I would say, 5 to 6 years. The share of renewables in the power mix, in the production of electricity, would actually rise to around 68%. On the graph, basically, you see what is the situation in 2020. And you can see that coal is actually only 13% of the gross power mix. Only 30% of the entire electricity production on the level of the EU was actually from coal. And this will need to be only diminished to 2% in 2030. So yeah, this is I would say the most important thing. Of course, this is very simplified. There are a lot of huge other discussions, especially as I said, hydrogen, what to do with the heavy industries like cement, like steel. How do we actually start finally? What do we do with individual transport, with freight transport? What do we do with the major issues when it comes to aviation, despite the fact that of course we're not flying so much in the pandemic, but everybody sort of thinks that that will actually pick up once the pandemic is, I would say, mostly solved with the vaccination. So this is basically just, I would say, one simplification of what will be the major issue or the most straightforward issue to decide on in the next 10 years, and that is to finally do the coal phase out in the EU. And switch to clean energy. But when it comes to the Western Balkans, it's interconnected to the EU. Of course, it wants to become part of the EU one day. What is the situation? Well, I would say the discussion is just starting. It's still, the situation is as it was. So business as usual. There is no CO2 pricing, so there is no ETS, emission trading scheme on national level, on regional level. I think only Montenegro has some sort of like very minuscule carbon pricing, but in general, the region is still relying heavily and too much on fossil fuels. As you can see basically from the graph, more than 60%, even when you take Albania into account, which is only hydro, comes from lignite, and that's all the lignite power plants, most of them actually older than 40 years. Just as FYI. And not only that, not only does this country rely on this sort of polluting power sector, which is of course determined for the health of the population, but also it exports this dirty electricity together with the emissions outside of the borders. Of course, emissions and pollution does not know borders. There are no borders when it comes to that. And they export that to the EU. For instance, around 20% of all the electricity exports in the EU, so the emissions that the EU imported from outside countries was around 20%, actually was just from the region of the Western Balkans. Three countries mainly, for instance, in 2019 exported electricity to the EU. That's Serbia, North Macedonia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. And of course, from the graph, you can see that both three countries actually rely quite heavily for more than 50% of their production to the old lignite-fired power plants. So yeah, this is an issue as well, and not only for the pollution, of course, which is quite bad in the region, but also it's an issue for the EU itself. So what does the EU want? The EU want a level playing field with the EU Green Deal. That means that in order to stop carbon leakage, meaning that of course, if electricity you have to do a coal phase out in the next 10 years, you will just import cheap electricity from the region of the Western Balkans because there is no high CO2 price and there is no climate target. There are no targets whatsoever. The EU wants to stop this and wants to have a level playing field. So basically that the electricity, even if it's produced in a country which does not follow the same strict climate regulation, it will still cost the same. That's basically what the graph shows. Of course, I will share also this presentation for whoever wants to see it, I would say, in more detail. We can't go here into, I would say, quite big details of what the carbon border adjustment mechanism really means. But at the end of the day, it's a tax. It's a tax which should be, I would say, of course, in compliance with WTO rules when it comes to a lot of agreements that especially also the region has with the EU. And it's a challenge, of course, to find the right, I would say, how to calculate rightly this tax in order to be with WTO, in order to be aligned with WTO rules. And to be honest, this is not a silver bullet to fight climate change or to stop pollution. There is a lot of research being done already that this carbon border adjustment mechanism, if introduced, of course, it makes a level playing field. So for the products produced in regions outside of the EU with those same products produced in the EU. But it doesn't stop pollution. Of course, the power plants in the region of the Western Balkans will stay. If there is no carbon price within the region itself, if there are no targets, if there are no plan for coal phase out, there is still business as usual, which means that we still have the pollution from these very old power plants. But of course, there is a challenge of how to, I would say, nudge the countries of the Western Balkans, especially through the energy community of Southeast Europe, and we'll discuss that later in the panel, of not only, I would say, making targets and establishing targets, but when it comes to lowering emissions and when it comes to increasing renewable energies and energy efficiency measures, but but to also, I would say, to also to also introduce one of the most, I would say, what was the most efficient mechanisms into the coal phase-out processes in the EU, and that is a carbon price within the countries or within the region itself. In any case, I will not hold too much, only just some part from the research that we already done in one of our studies, which will be published soon, of lignite phase out in the Western Balkans up until 2040. These are all the units that are actually being planned in the region. So this is a lot of money, a lot of funds going into new units running on coal and lignite, even though the EU is canceling them, of course. And basically you see that none of the newly planned units is actually making any profit. They're all making losses if there is a carbon price. And this is very important to know, especially for the investors, especially for those who are taking the loans. And for some units, they are even making losses without any carbon price. So even if there is no CO2 pricing, they're even in that case they're making losses, and this is, I would say, quite important quite important to know. So I will not hold too much, only to mention that the Green Agenda for the Western Balkans was introduced by the European Commission as the sort of pandan of the EU Green Deal in order to finally accelerate the coal phase out and help the countries lower the emissions, reduce CO2, reduce pollution. The countries of the Western Balkans signed this Balkan Green Agenda last year in November. Honestly, how it will be operationalized or what are the programs underneath, it's still, as far as I know, being discussed. So it's still quite unknown how this will be implemented or how the Commission will help the country specifically when it comes to cleaning the energy sources. There will be a lot of investments needed. I will not talk too much about it, but for instance, our research showed that only to go from coal to clean, it will there will be needed for 30 years or 20 to 30 years, around 40 billion of investments. Of course, this is also an opportunity for the countries to actually finally, I would say, move their economies and open new jobs, especially because that's also has been a lot of problematic in the region. And there are a lot of people here, I believe, on this platform today who actually have touched upon and worked on that issue. And just very shortly, this is the pledged programmed funding for the region of the Western Balkans. So basically, you see for everything from transport to everything has been around 40 billion of planned funding. But I will only mention this. Maybe it seems like a lot of money, but when you compare it to what it needs only for the energy sector or the power sector, it's actually not so much. So yeah, of course, there needs to be, I would say, very from the countries of the Western Balkans, also a more serious approach of approaching not only the EU, but IFIs when it comes to funding any sort of energy transition or fighting climate change. But also, I would say there is a big challenge ahead of anybody who is giving funds like the EU, like IFIs, World Bank, etc., how to tie this assistance to actually achieving certain climate goals. So I will stop here. As I said, I will give the presentation. You can look it in peace and maybe also come back with certain questions. I would also then maybe just stop the sharing of the screen. There it is. And then maybe just finally open the panel and the part that's quite interesting for me, and present you the panel. Dirk Buschle, which is, I think most of you already know, is the Deputy Director and Legal Counsel of the Energy Community Secretariat. Then we have also Diana Berisha, who leads the Forum for Civic Initiatives and Grassroots and COSIT, a consortium of Kosovo leading CSOs. So basically, she has quite an extensive experience of working actively in the region to raise awareness. What does sustainability actually mean, and how important factor it is in energy policy and decision making. And last but definitely not least, Assistant Professor Vladimir Đurđević from Belgrade, Serbia, who is an Associate Professor of Meteorology, Climatology, and the Faculty of Physics, and he's a really an expert of climate modeling and climate data analysis. So I'm opening with this the panel. I would definitely like to ask first Dirk Buschle to reflect on what I said, and basically how can we actually, from the position of one organization like the Energy Community of Southeast Europe, how can we make the Green Deal agenda the single strategic priority for the Western Balkans countries?
Thanks a lot, Sonja. And only a few words in my native language. Herzlichen Dank für die Einladung. Viele Grüße an die Mitglieder der Südosteuropa.
Just a few words in my own language. I greet the President and all the members here. I'm happy to be in the panel.
Everything so well that all I can do is to give a governance perspective, because the energy community, as you mentioned, was meant to bring the countries in the Western Balkans closer to the European Union. At the time, that's over 15 years ago, the parameters were a little bit different. Then it was about preparing accession in a sector as sensitive as energy and also natural gas, so to secure what they later called the Southern Corridor. And I must maybe contradict a little bit. You mentioned energy community as being a nudging element. We are not really in the nudging business. We do this as the Romans used to do it, as Napoleon used to do it, as any empire used to do it, with an export of European law to these countries. And the deal is a deal that hasn't actually been followed up in some respects, that the countries adhere to European legislation, implement it in their energy sectors, and get closer to EU accession. And now we're at this next very decisive level of not only taking sectoral rules and principles over, but the entire Green Deal. And the Green Deal, I think, Sonja, you presented that very well, is so massive in transforming our societies and economies that you can ask yourself, is this current formula, this current basis for exporting European rules, for Western Balkans to accept European rules, still legitimate? What is at stake is not less than, on the one hand, to widen a gap between the Western Balkans economies and the EU economy by, for instance, the absence of a carbon pricing, widen it so far that it may be impossible to bridge it at some point. But on the other hand, the risk is, of course, if we come on with the full machinery of the Green Deal into the Western Balkans, there is a risk that we will overburden their economies so much that it will just break under it. So it's a very thin line. It's a tightrope that we're walking on when we're discussing the export and the implementation of the Green Deal to the Western Balkans. And in this, maybe I may just share a few experiences that we are making here. The first one being, or maybe the major one being, is actually some of the myths that we used to believe in come to the test and don't really withstand this test of the Green Deal. An original founding myth of the energy community was that you have to invest, Europe has to invest more in infrastructure. Well, it turns out that the infrastructure in electricity is actually, you said it, Sonja, is already there. It's just underused because incumbents, the electricity companies and their system operators, they withhold it in order not to open and integrate their market. That's still a problem. And gas infrastructure, another original founding reason for an energy community, is becoming questionable per se. We're talking already more hydrogen than we talk natural gas, despite, of course, players like the Russians, but also the Americans are still very active in the gas business and the gas sectors in the region. Another founding myth was maybe this belief in the market that also determined European energy policy for a long time. And we realized that when it comes to decarbonization, the market alone evidently cannot fix it. You need additional tools. You need, for example, something that Sonja reported about, to price in externalities. You need to give carbon emissions a price that is, if I mentioned before that we have to walk on a very thin line, but that's the least common denominator, that carbon needs to be given a price, not only to discourage investment in carbon, but also to encourage the alternative, and that is investment in renewables. The question is, of course, only how to do it best. And there we have a recent study in the energy community that the best possible formula is to combine a gradual pricing of carbon, so a CO2 tax or an emissions trading scheme, which starts at around 2025. That's probably also the time that we need to prepare the countries for taking up such a system, starting with basics such as monitoring and reporting, etc. So if we start phasing in a price which is only a fraction and which depends on each country's specifics of carbon price into the Western Balkans, and combine this with a true regional integration of the energy markets and economic sectors, something that has been missing so far as well, then we will achieve the best possible economic output. We come at a price overall of some 4 billion euros, but this is only half of what it costs if we are doing it the non-integrated manner, that is full carbon price and no integration of market. It will be not for free, this Green Deal, that is for sure, but we can, that's the good news, through implementing some basics, some economic basics, we can reduce the price significantly. Now, the last thing I would like to cover maybe is why did it take us so long? Why are we now in 2021, early 2021, in a situation where we have to ask ourselves almost this all or nothing questions? Why didn't we prepare the region for the Green Deal together and jointly with the European Union? Well, that is evidently a question that first and foremost would go to the European Union. Secondly, it's not that the region is completely stranded and sunk in coal investment. Especially in the last couple of years, you've seen a flood of renewables investment as well, which have been bringing prices down for renewable support as well. It's all good developments, which is starting to really pose real competition to coal, but it's not enough. It needed more EU engagement, and it needs more EU engagement. You can probably say that the EU was a little bit introverted over the last couple of years because they had to get the Green Deal fixed at home, and that was not easy, as those of you who have followed the policy development know. And it's now time to go with the full machinery into expanding the Green Deal to these neighboring economies. There, what is next on our agenda is indeed, Sonia mentioned the financial opportunities that are present. That's always the start. COVID actually helped in that respect. We are discussing targets, not only for 2015, that is a target given by the Paris Agreement to decarbonize entirely, but targets for 2030, as the EU has it as well. That's on the energy communities plate this year. We're discussing the carbon border adjustment mechanism or carbon tax. And I agree with Sonia that this is not the best solution forward because it doesn't differentiate between good and bad energy. We should really focus on introducing this carbon price that should be highest on the priority list. And in this, we are relatively confident that now, after a few years where the European Union had to get the Green Deal on rails, on track, so to say, within the European Union, and the Commission was preoccupied with this, that we will see a very active European Commission, hopefully also a very active European Union. Maybe the German presidency wasn't that what people in the Balkans or many people would have hoped for because of all the other issues that had to be solved back home and closer to home. But now I think that the formula, not only from knowing what needs to be done, Sonia outlined that, but also agreeing that all the political, diplomatic, legal instruments are being prepared so to take these partner economies on board and engage with them, embark with them on a Green Deal which doesn't stop at the European border, is actually there, and 2021 should be the official year of starting that. Thanks.
Thank you. That's I would say definitely a very good reflection on what was discussed, and also I would say to put even more for the next discussion, especially then I want to ask Diana to reflect not only on what I said, but also Dick, specifically coming from the point of view of civil society in the region, and how do you see all of this, I would say, very difficult processes that are coming in accelerated speed for the region, and whether the region is actually aware of, and the civil society and the political elites as well, of these processes, and how do you think they perceive all this?
Thank you, Sonia. As well as I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to contribute to this very important and interesting panel's discussion. Before I start saying anything, I really would like to wish you all, the panelists, the discussing, the audience, families, to be healthy and to stay healthy, because the situation is quite critical, at least in the region, in terms of health-wise. COVID-19 has, of course, exposed the vulnerability of our healthcare system, our societies, as well as the need for a greater resilience. That is for sure. But it also has revealed the necessity to work together, to come to some new innovative ways of cooperating, be it a cooperation between countries or sectors as well. And now, that is the importance of European Green Deal for the Western Balkan member countries as well. And at this point, I believe that European Green Deal must be one of the key topics in all political talks of European Union with member states of Western Balkans. So bringing European Green Agenda, Green Deal at the very highest level of political talks, I believe it's a good start for countries of the region. Now, if we were to see where the country stands as we currently speak, I'll start with Kosovo. We just had elections last week after not even a year that we had elections, and we had a government that went down in the middle of pandemics. So politically speaking, the situation is quite fragile. But on the other hand, there's optimism, because we believe that the upcoming government is quite progressive and hopefully and wishes to be seriously taking into consideration the importance of the European Green Deal being part of the national strategy. At the same time, I have to say that there are also individuals within that political, let's say, compilation that still focus on fossil fuel investments. And that's when the civil society actors need to actually work, even with individual MPs, to change everything, starting from their understanding and educating them, like we've done even with previous governments. With regard to Albania, again, Albania has immense potential for the development of renewable energy industry, which would address, we believe, would address the unemployment issue, as well as the highly migration of young people, in particular, from the country. However, there will be elections in 25th of April, which will hopefully will bring some kind of change at the political elite, aiming to have some change in their belief and understanding, and also mainstreaming European Green Deal into their national plans and programs. There are some countries of the Western Balkans that have turned to China, Turkey, and Russia for the help in dealing with pandemic, but that also has reflected in receiving investments, especially from Chinese banks, in fossil fuel power plants and such. We're talking about Bosnia-Herzegovina, Republika Srpska, and Serbia as well. So that kind of puts it in another dimension, and it kind of questions the orientation of our neighboring countries with regard to their European Green Deal agenda. North Macedonia seems to be ahead of the countries in the region because of they have already introduced a carbon pricing mechanism. We also have Montenegro, but we still need to wait because they just had a new government and to see which way are they going. What needs to be done from a civil society point of view, and as far as I've been able to monitor and to understand, is one, when we talk about just transition into climate neutrality, we also need to be carefully taking into consideration the existing oligarchs, those that have been exploiting for many, many years the fossil fuel energy. We don't want them to become the new oligarchs of, let's say, the renewable industry. So one oligarch, one company to buy the entire industry, the entire sector. That's something that I am into very much trying to understand and see what, as a civil society actor, we can do to address that, specifically with, in particular, with local governments. On the other hand, I believe that you mentioned the amount that European Union is allocating for the Western Balkans, but what I think we need is this large funding tool that could potentially be managed by the Secretariat, reaching EU targets in transportation, or perhaps creating a healthy competition between countries of the Western Balkans on the energy efficiency, and for example, designing cross-border projects that, for example, could help basically problematic cross-border countries to start generating new energy capacities. So in a way, I'm thinking like progressively, like not use the conflict, but use that problematic situation between different neighboring countries into generating new capacities, energy capacities. With regard to civil society organizations, it's unfortunate that quite the last couple of years, there's been somehow less and less involvement of the regional civil society organizations into these new topics that we're discussing today. There's a lot of capacities that have been used to fight and to address the issues with fossil fuel, lignite, but now there also are other investments in organizations just to keep them silent and not practically doing the real work in the field. I'll stop here for now, and then I'll continue if there's questions or anything else.
Thank you, Dan. I mean, you raised so many questions from political economy, which is, of course, a very important and I would say a threat, a big threat, and also the involvement of civil society, which I think it's to do the transformation from centralized to decentralized system, we cannot do without the involvement of citizens. So you raised, I think these are issues we can talk for months, not only just today. But I would then go to Professor Đurđević actually to ask him then, yeah, we discussed what the countries are doing, or where they are, or where the international community it is, and where it's heading, and what it wants to see in the region. But what does all of this actually, what we are discussing, means for actually fighting climate change, and whether do we actually even have a shot to fight already existing troubles because of climate change with all these new instruments, money, etc., etc.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question, and thank you for giving me opportunity to be the part of this panel. Of course, I would like to thank you one more time for the award today, the Juriček Award. Yeah, it's very interesting about that we should change our energy system, and I would agree with everything that the previous speakers said about this transformation, and also your presentation was very informative about that. I agree with all of that. I think that the most important part of this story is that the bold action need to be seen. I mean, we talk about this for many years. We saw some action, but we need to see really bold action about all these stories. And as I said in my interview today, I think that one of the major problems is that we should do something that we as a society never do before in our past. Okay, we never live in a time as a society when the climate was changing in time scales of decades. Okay, the last 5 years was the warmest 5 years on planet Earth, and the last decade was the warmest decade. And you see that trend that is here, and that you should to fight with that trend. And on the other side, you need to transform yourself, and you need to learn. The most important thing is that you need to learn from this transformation. You for sure, we cannot have a plan that it's going to work 100% in the way that we imagine how that plan should look like. So probably we're going to make some bad decisions, but we should change that. And so it's really complicated. And energy transformation is really important. It's really hard issue. It's not so easy. Even that today we know that probably the electrification of the energy power sector is maybe not so hard, and also the electrification of the transport is maybe not so hard. But on the other side, we also know that last mile, when you need to really put your emissions to the zero, it's super hard, and we need to prepare for that. But on that hard path of energy transformation, we often forget about this adaptation. Maybe you want to talk about that also here, because you have this one part which means that you need to put your emission to the zero, but also we know that even the Paris Agreement is something that is going to work in the future. We're going to see another degree warming in the next few decades. And right now we need to adapt to the actual changes, to the actual trends, to the actual extremes, and we're going to have more debt in the future. So for sure we're going to need more task to do dealing with adaptation in the future, with the droughts, with the floods, with heat waves, etc., with new diseases probably related to the migration of climate zones. We know that in the region we have some, let's say, new mosquitoes that makes easily to transfer something like the things like a West Nile virus or something like that. So we all need to fight that, to adapt to that, and to transform our energy system, which is even more demanding task in comparison to just transform the energy system. And we often forgot this part of adaptation. Even in the Paris Agreement, when we talk about the Paris Agreement, always the first thing is that we should put our emissions to the zero, or to keep temperature to the 2 degrees. And we often forget that there is a fund for adapting to the future climate. There is a fund. We much less talk about that globally we need to be careful, and we should adapt to the future climate change, and that we should also talk about it. In that sense, I think that region is really on the hard position, let's say. I sometimes call that as a compression of time. You know, we have now several decades to do this energy transformation, and during that several decades, we're going to see the more pressure from climate extremes. So if we do nothing in the next years, we will have less time to adapt, and we will have less time to do energy transformation. And when you have less time to do something, probably you will be on the bigger risk that your decisions is not be so good as you have more time to think about, and to test things, and to try things, and to go into it. And in that sense, I think it's for me, it's crucial to start to work very effectively right now in terms of energy transformation, but both in the same manner to work on adaptation to climate change. Just because of that thing that if you are pushed to the wall, let's say by climate extremes, and you are pushed to the wall by a common economy that you need to transform your energy system, then you will open the room for maybe many wrong decisions, or maybe many, let's say, forced decisions, maybe not wrong, but forced decisions. And I think it's not good position for us for that. Of course, we as a region trying to make this gap between European Union and ourselves, to make this gap smaller, and to become part of European Union in the future. And if we lost this opportunity to transform, and to even at least in this part of our lives become closer to European Union, I think that we are making really wrong decision that will even will expand this gap, not closing it, or making it smaller. So in that sense, I think that we should be very careful about this. We should start to work on this. We should have this kind of bold moves. We should have some kind of bold messages. When we talk about renewables here, we should talk about real renewables, not some cosmetic changes or some small changes that politicians like to use just to show that they understand what is happening. So in that sense, I would say that will be my message. Just to underline one more time, we have this energy transition, but we also should think about the adaptation to climate change, since we know that region will be under the pressure of climate extremes in the future. It is already under the pressure, but it probably is going to be under bigger pressure in the future.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. And I really definitely have to underline again what you said, that in these transformations that will probably even be faster in the time that it's coming than there were in the future. It really is that we need to be careful to not make the wrong decisions, because they will have an impact, as you said, of whether we get actually closer to convergence with the EU or actually further far away. With that, before I open the floor to your questions and ask some of the questions I already noted down, actually I would like to involve a bit the audience and ask the organizers to pull two poll questions to see basically what are your thoughts on what we are discussing, what we are discussing today, and see how you feel about the topics. So I would ask Christian to please put the first poll questions. Yes. So basically the first one is how much you are actually acquainted with the Green Deal and with the Balkan Green Agenda. Because this is, of course, also important from the perspective of whether this is something that it's or important for the region of the Western Balkans, or something that, yes, I would say it's not so much talked about, or wasn't, at least, not only because of the pandemic, I would say, but because of other reasons as well. So yeah, please answer the question. Okay, so somewhat familiar with both of them. It's the majority and only know about the Green Deal. So this is good, because now we actually see that also the organizers, the Zudosova Gesellschaft, actually made a good decision to open a discussion on this, and not to end here, but actually to continue having these discussions in the region, because it means that we definitely need to work more on strategically making the green agenda important for the Western Balkans. When I say the green agenda, I don't mean just the framework, but actually the decarbonization of the Western Balkans, because 31% of course only heard about the EU Green Deal. Thanks, quite interesting answers for sure. And then the second question is, what do you actually think? About what is the strategic importance for the region. I mean, we talked about what we think, what is the strategic importance, but actually, what do you think is a strategic importance? One is, of course, the economic post-pandemic recovery. Of course, another one is the addressing pollution and climate change more seriously. Another one is strengthening energy security and building new infrastructure like the gas infrastructure. Or do you maybe believe that everything that I mentioned is actually important in the next year or two, after dealing or halfly dealing with the pandemic, I would say? And all of the above is number one. A lot of strategic important issues, I would say, for the region of the Western Balkans. But of course, I cannot agree with you. I cannot agree with you more there. It's to start addressing finally the pollution and climate change more seriously. Of course, I mean, the economic post-pandemic recovery, it's number three, and emphasizing the large infrastructure projects has the least answers. So this is actually quite good and feeds into our debate. With that, I will ask the first question then, which actually is about the role of gas, from Jan Axel Vos, who actually asked whether the plans under the economic and investment plan, so under basically the green agenda for the Western Balkans, to build new infrastructure. For instance, there is one planned project between Kosovo and North Macedonia, whether this is good or bad when it comes to decarbonizing the region and fighting climate change. So I would leave actually whoever wants to answer, Diak, Diana, Vladimir, whoever wants to answer first, please go.
Okay, I can't resist that invitation. Thanks a lot. Very good question. And it's evidently a fight which only starts in the EU right now. You can see it on many front lines, so to say. The question is gas transition fuel. It is clear that decarbonization means no gas, but does it still make sense to invest in gas infrastructure in the year 2021, when we know this all has to be phased out at some point, is an open question, and there is no general answer. It is also to be looked at a little bit different, probably. I'm sure not all NGOs would agree, but in the context of the Western Balkans, because indeed gas has this potential to replace coal, and that's something good. And we just have to make sure that whatever we invest in gas around this time now doesn't create us problem in 2050 when the infrastructure will not be fully written off yet. And there you have several aspects which provide an answer to that question. One is that there is a boom now in hydrogen in the European Union, which also will come and is coming to the Western Balkans. So you need to make sure that all infrastructures are ready for hydrogen, no matter what you build. Second is that there are places, regions and countries, you mentioned Kosovo, that indeed would benefit from a gasification and where the plans are much advanced already. Unless you have a significant amount of renewables in combination with storage, in combination with complete and ideal market integration with neighboring countries, you will probably have to replace the over 90% that Kosovo is relying on coal with some other baseload electricity, as we call it. Hydro will also not do the job, and as a continuation of a pipeline between Greece and Northern Macedonia, it would probably make sense, but that will, I think, be clarified in discussions over the next few months to continue that from Skopje to Pristina, and thus tackle one of the biggest problems in terms of reliance on coal in the region, which is indeed Kosovo's full reliance on lignite.
Thank you. Maybe if the other panelists want to touch upon this, or should I go with other questions? Okay. If not, then maybe also a bit connected to this, but with the coal sector. There is a question from Jens Bastian on financing new coal-fired units. So we touched upon this a bit, but financing them from Chinese funds or Chinese banks. And basically how to elevate green financing that does not rely on Chinese funds in the region when it comes to new projects in the energy sector or other sectors as well, I would say. So again, whoever wants to answer this or give maybe an opinion when it comes to Chinese funds in the region or Chinese presence in the region as well.
Maybe I can say something, but
yes.
probably Dirk will say more. Can give us more insight in terms of economy and energy, but in general about the Chinese investment in Serbia, because we know that right now we have a lot of Chinese investment here. And we know that Chinese also, the Chinese money come into the big industry, like a steel factory in Smederevo and also the Bor copper mine, and etc. I think that actually because of this huge air pollution right now in Serbia, the people start to be aware that these huge investments in the large industry, which comes from China, that it doesn't come without a price. Okay, that we right now, all these problems with the pollutions can be connected with this large industry, and that the Chinese companies are not so willing to put any kind of let's say regulations in real life in terms to reduce the emissions of different polluters and to be more aware of environment. In that sense, I think that Chinese they're not losing the battle. It's hard to say that because we know that China is right now is really economically strong country, let's say, but I think that they lose some points here because of this environmental pollution, and that people will be more and more aware in the future that all these Chinese investments, as I said, they doesn't come without a price, and that we're gonna probably sacrifice our environment if we accept everything which comes with China without any critical thinking what is coming and how it's gonna be implemented. So it's a small step. I know economy is much stronger than people people awareness related to the environment. But I think it's somehow also important small step that people start to be aware of that. And I think that from the side, let's say, of NGOs and civil society organization, I think that also many actions right now are pointed to the fact that that we can expect the huge environmental impacts if we accept everything related to the industry which comes from China, which is good. But on the other side, we know that the economy is really strong force in our lives, and in that sense, probably Dirk can say about something how you can economically fight without with this kind of situation.
Yes, Dirk, please.
Yeah, just very briefly, I think investment is always good, and I have the impression that Chinese investment is very much opportunistic. We see that investment in coal these days is not possible without support from the state, so without support from the host state. And if, for example, the countries in the region, I'm thinking about Bosnia and Herzegovina here and the Tuzla 7 power plant, if they would only apply the European rules in place already properly, like state aid rules, and also start giving carbon a price, Chinese investment in coal would stand no chance whatsoever. So this is maybe more than to demonize China. This is more about the countries not paying respect to the European rules, and maybe also self-critically the Europeans not caring too much about whether state aid, for example, is applied in Bosnia and Herzegovina. This should be our first line of defense and the common denominator. Investment is welcome from whatever continent and whatever country, but it should comply with our rules, and that's the European rules in the Western Balkans as well.
Thank you, Dirk. Yes, I mean, the presentation and our research has also shown that there is even with the Chinese funds and even without any CO2 pricing, Tuzla 7 is actually going to be losing money. So I would say that this is something that really needs to be taken into account of, but this is also then connected to, I would definitely say, to how political elites make decisions. So maybe then the question to Diana, specifically from the perspective of civil society, that I want to hear from you when it comes to investments. Do you actually have, because you work in the civil society for so long, do you have this feeling that when it comes to chasing investments in a way, especially for these transformations, the governments or political elites do pay attention to where the money comes from, or how to invest it in let's say green jobs or energy transformation?
That's a good question. Well, there's the public appearance of governments, what they want to be seen, or how they want to be seen from the public and the international community, by saying that yes, we care very much for the European standards. But on the other side, when decisions are made beyond closed doors, then no one knows what those standards are and what the governments actually make deals, because we're not members, or we're not part of the consultations, or we're not part of, and I'm talking as civil society representative, we're not part of the agreements. So this is what I meant when I said earlier about the monopolizing of sectors, monopolizing of industries by oligarchs, because, and in particular with the renewables now being less and less costly, there is a risk, there is a danger that previous oligarchs or current oligarchs to be taking that position against, because of the deals that they will be making with governments, and the fact that we will, as civil society actors, we will, no matter how strong and how, let's say, vocal we would be, there is always that risk of these oligarchs monopolizing every kind of sector and industry. And I was also thinking about gas, sorry to go back to the second question, but it is quite political for Kosovo, so it's going to be tricky, and I really look forward to seeing what the new government will have to say when actually designing or defining their priorities and policies with regard to gas investments in Kosovo.
Thank you. Actually, thank you for touching on that as well. It's good to hear, yeah, that it is quite political, and I do think, yeah, gas is also quite a geostrategic issue. It's not only technical, and it's not only to swap coal with gas, to be honest. I have another interesting question because, yeah, everything sometimes somehow ends with money. But to Professor Đurđević from Gudrun Steinaka, that there were already projects on adaptation. So what we talked about adaptation and climate change by EU and Germany, but with little practical effect. So basically, how maybe not how not to get funds, but how to get more political will to tackle this problem.
Yeah, it's true. We have here, and probably in other countries in the region, for sure, we have this kind of analysis, how we should think about adaptation and what priorities should be and what potential projects should be and which kind of risk we're going to face in the future and how to relate to that risk. So let's say that UNFCCC reports, so-called national communication, you always have a list of adaptation measures for each sector, but in the real life, you cannot see that is implemented. The first thing is that we should talk about that and always mention the adaptation, I think, as much as mitigation and energy transformation. That's one point. And another point is for sure that adaptation should also find its way how to be part of the national laws and policies. Like let's say some kind of strategies or some kind of national laws related to climate change. For example, in Serbia, our parliament should adopt a so-called climate change law in the next, let's say, few weeks or maybe few months. It's not the law that gonna stop the climate change, but it's law about how we're gonna track our emissions and this monitoring verification system, etc. And also there is one article in the law related to the adaptation, but I think that probably there should be more space to adaptation in such a document in terms that each municipality or each document which is some kind of environmental impact study or environmental impact report for the new infrastructure projects should include this kind of analysis on adaptation. For example, let's say in the last few years, we built a lot of highways in Serbia, but none of that highways doesn't include this analysis, how that highways will behave in the future if we had more extreme precipitation. Does that highways is going to be flooded or not? And I know, because I know some people from let's say this climate engineering community. I know that the one of the highways in built even doesn't take into account the same amount of precipitation that we have in 2014. So that highway is not adapted for the future climate change. So government should be aware of that and should be push investors and also construction companies that if something important is planned to be built here, that this information about future climate should be included. We have that information. It's not a science. It's rocket science that you don't know how much temperature increase you can expect or how much precipitation, but you should have some kind of regulation who and when should use that kind of information to plan the future. So that's the one of the thing that how we can approach that. I would like also to answer one more question. Somebody asked about this 10-year time window that we have, like a 10-year to face this crisis, and after that it can be late. I would like to stress that I don't like to have these binary conclusions about the climate, like today everything is good and tomorrow is the end of the world. So I know that we should talk about these 10 years and that we should talk that we need the action now. But sometimes it is not motivating when you said something like that, because many people say, okay, everything is lost. We should raise our hands and see what's going to happen in the future. Also about this 2-degree target, we should do the best to stay below 2 degrees, but it's better to stay on 2.1 than in 3.1. Okay, so it's not the end of the world if we pass 2 degrees. 0.11 degrees. So I think it can be demotivating if we use this language like we have 1 year, we have 10 years, everything is going to be lost. We should work, we should think, we should take all our knowledge that we have, we should take that knowledge and try to make the best decisions. As I said, it's not easy task, it's super hard task, but I think that we don't have any other option than to try to solve this super complex and super hard task and to secure the future.
Thank you, Professor Đurđević. Definitely, I think especially very good points raised about how to have climate change adapted projects and infrastructure being built, especially how do we involve not only governments but investors in this. I think this is probably a whole topic for dissertation, not only a panel. And especially, yes, how do we, I mean, yes, definitely in the EU, I think nowhere is basically, yes, in 1 or 2 years. I think the only probable threat is that there will always be political elites who will say there is enough time, and how to find the middle ground between there is enough time and there is no time at all, of course, because these are difficult and time-consuming transformations. Just maybe before we end, to touch upon, we didn't touch upon that much. Of course, it's just such a broad topic. To touch upon the energy efficiency, I would say there was one comment on that. Why don't we pay more attention to that and not only to building new things, of course, and also from Hans-Jörg Brenau, of course, is how, what is the, when it comes to the huge potential of increasing energy efficiency, mostly, of course, in the building sector, and how can the funds from the Green Agenda, so these pledged funds for the region can be mobilized in this direction specifically. I would maybe just add, if Hans-Jörg allows me, how do we actually also fight, how do we not only improve energy efficiency, but fight energy poverty maybe with these funds finally in the region. So yeah, whoever wants to answer, please. Yes, Dirk.
I can just start maybe, because it's a good question. Energy efficiency, you know, the saying goes, it's the first fuel, or energy efficiency first, so whatever we save is good from all possible accounts. But it's not so easy to implement, actually. It's much more easy to implement renewable energy projects because you have real business cases, investment cases. And yet the European Union is ready to finance a big, or to extend a big renovation wave also to the Western Balkans. And of course, you need to find the governance, find a possibility and the right ways how to translate this goodwill and the money available into real actions. I think there are many areas which have not been properly explored. Energy efficiency is mostly in housing, and that's what matters most, is again a question also of how to frame the appropriate governance. If you think of this in Germany, it has much to do with how multi-apartment buildings are governed, of Wohnungseigentumsgesetz, etc. This is mostly missing in the Balkans. So there are either no rules or bad rules which apply to the governance of multi-apartment buildings. Also the relation, this is then core civil law, the relation between tenants and the landlords, that should be attacked, and to make it not only an incentive to invest in energy efficiency, but also to create concrete projects, first governance related and then really insulation, changes of windows, etc., etc. This, and Sonia, I can just confirm that you put the right focus also on energy poverty. That's the first and most important issue also in helping wasting and paying of energy that is not needed. But it goes both sides. Also the fact that the governments right now fight energy poverty by keeping the prices low is of course problematic, because it doesn't give the right incentive to invest in energy efficiency measures. So we are in a vicious circle, and the $100 million question is where to break that circle and where to get control of it.
Thank you. If anybody else wants, Diana, please.
Yes, that's quite a good question. And I would start with an example. In 2013, COSID, the consortium of civil society organizations in Kosovo working on sustainable development, we actually approached one of the local municipalities, in Obilic, which is one of the most polluted areas in Kosovo, to develop an energy efficiency project in one of the most almost demolished buildings, a public housing building, for the purpose of showing that it can be done. And we were able to mobilize donors that which were interested in supporting energy efficiency concepts from 2012, 2013. And after so many meetings with the mayor, his final answer was, no, I will demolish that building and I will transform that into a public park. And people that were living in that building would be transported and given public housing in some other areas. But the reality is that so today it's 2021, to this day, that building still exists. There's no public green park, and those people are living there in horrible conditions. So what I want to say is that when we talk about energy efficiency projects and pushing this idea, it's quite a hard work for anyone to convince local governments, central governments, of the importance of investing in energy efficiency of public buildings to begin with, but also housing as well. It's quite a lot of work to convince and to educate the citizens, especially in particular in Kosovo, that when they build their houses, isolation is of critical importance, because it also reduces the heating, the demand of energy to heat their houses. So it demands a lot of mainstreaming energy efficiency policy or demands into the national policy, national programs, coordinate local and central governments with respect to implementing those policies, and then monitor the implementation of energy efficiency projects, as well as educating the entire population of the country. This is what I would say for energy efficiency projects.
Thank you, Diana. Yes, I mean, I'm quite happy that we're sort of ending with the most important thing, and that's the citizens, actually. How all these funds that we are talking about all the time, all these processes that we are talking about all the time, can actually at the end serve the citizens of the region, and not just forget them in rushing to just, either get closer to the EU or get closer to attracting more and more, I would say, foreign investors, ecologists, but actually about political economy, because at the end this does affect the citizens. So maybe just some last words. I know Diana talked a lot about it, but maybe from Vladimir's or Dirk's perspective when it comes to how corruption actually hinders these processes, and maybe not to live on a bad note, but actually, is it possible to fight corruption in the energy in the region and finally beat it?
It's super hard. I don't know what to say. That's one of the points that I said, that we're gonna have this compression of time. You know, if you are pushed by climate extremes and you need to transform your energy system because your economy is losing on the border, let's say, because of that tax on border. So you're economically in the bad position. You're in bad position because of the extremes. You don't have time to do transformation and the whole world is changing around you. Then that corruption, it's open door for the corruption to be even stronger than we have it right now. Okay, so when you are pushed and when you see that you need to do something but you don't have time to do it, then you can open the door for the something which we call corruption, and we know that the whole region is super experienced. Club of countries in terms how the corruption is working, how we find our ways to not escape this kind of behavior. So in that sense, I think it can be really bad situation in the region. Even right now, I think in Serbia we are really on the beginning of this energy transformation to the renewables. But even now we see let's say, some kind of sketches how the corruption may looks like in terms of this energy transition, because right now in Serbia we are also in the process of adopting a new law related to the renewable energy, and we open these questions about the auctions of the green energy. And one of the question is how these auctions is going to work right in Serbia. And right now we know that we're going to have that mechanism in the future, but nobody is capable to set how these auctions is going to look like. The EBRD is going to advise us how to do that. But I think also we should be very careful about these auctions, because that auctions is also one of the points in this energy transition when corruption can be seen in very as a very fine example of that. So I think that we should think about it. I also personally sometimes I have a problem when I talk about the climate change, and then by the end when you explain people what is happening, you said, okay, we should transform our energy system. I personally afraid that this transformation will be problematic here because of the corruption, and maybe the general public will say, okay, you tell us that the energy transformation is good, and can you see right now what is happening? Okay, we're becoming worse society than we was in the past with the coal power plants. So it's also some kind of ethical question for me how to communicate energy transition.
Thank you. Yes, that is good. Also, maybe just to if Dirk and Diana, maybe if they want to add something, but I won't force you for sure because it's already late.
I can just briefly say, because I find this topic, Diana, you called it oligarchs in renewables, very fascinating. We need to have more research on that. And talking oligarchs, I immediately think of Ukraine, our other country, not so much the Western Balkans, probably they exist as well, but there we rather see the influence of the state in the classic energy sector as a problematic element. And I do believe in auctions as a way to increase also transparency, not only to bring prices down, which is good for citizens, but also to increase the transparency of the process. Doesn't mean that you don't have concentration in the market. There's big international players, and they are as powerful as the old oil and gas companies in the market, and soon they will be. And they will come to Serbia, they will come to Kosovo, they are already coming to other countries in the region. What I think is the untapped potential, and that brings us back to energy efficiency and putting the consumer in the center, is decentralized renewables, so solar PVs and other solutions at everybody's on everybody's roof, on everybody's at everybody's doorstep. I think there if we could channel the bulk of the money available now through the Western Balkan Green Deal strategy to decentralized solutions, I think we would catch a lot of birds with one stone. Corruption and carbon dependence being only a few of them.
Thank you. Yes, decentralized solution to the problems, and definitely climate change adapted infrastructure projects. It's one of the major takeaways. I want to really thank you both Diana, Dirk, and Vladimir for really the great discussion. I know that there is some criticism that are not concrete proposals, but trust me, all these people that were on panel today work really hard day by day to actually do change and transform the societies of the Western Balkans. And I think what they've done and what they're doing, it's enough as a proof that they're working hard to change the situation in the region. So that I will stop, and I will give finally the word back to the organizer.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sonja and panelists, for this insights and too interesting discussion, but also in the end, frankly, from Germany, I can say that the question, who is having the power on the renewables and the Energiewende, is also an interesting question in regard to, you might call them corrupt or big tycoons or whatever, also here. And also in Germany, we had changes in the sector in the last decade on this. And I think that it's not only a question of the Western Balkan model of decentralized renewables, where the capital, the asset, is in a lot of hands, and a lot of people are profiting, or economically also, of it, or is it a project of just the old oligarchic structures, or the old oligopolistic structure? This is not only in the Western Balkans, also we have it here. So also in Germany, we should make our homework. Not always the region down there, which have problems, corrupt or old-fashioned businesses who are also quite well in adopting